Today, I'm trying something a little different, dear viewer. Rather than discussing a killer rework, I want to present a concept that would impact all players, killers and survivors alike. It's an idea I feel would do a lot to improve the balance of the game, reduce potential frustration felt by players, and allow for more freedom of creation and balancing on behaviour's side. So, what is it? I call it the player base modifier cap. Essentially, a cap is set on the amount a player can modify their base stats as a killer or survivor. This would apply to both killers and survivors, with the values on each side set to a specific limit for each applicable statistic. Cameron, what the bloody Nora are you on about, I hear you ask? Well, all of this is much easier to explain with a simple example. Breaking pallets. A staple of killer gameplay, and at the moment something that can be modified by two different perks, Brutal Strength and Fire Up. At the moment, if each perk is used to its maximum potential, you can gain up to 40% quicker break speeds. Under the proposed system, pallets could not be broken more than 35% quicker. So, under the new system, a player would equip both perks for a combined effect of breaking pallets 40% quicker. However, the base modifier cap would step in and say that pallets cannot be broken more than 35% quicker. That would mean that in this example, you would only gain 35% faster break speeds, and that extra 5% granted by your perks is wasted. If you added any more modifiers on top, there would be no increase to break speeds as the cap is set to 35%. Essentially, stacking effects beyond a certain value becomes meaningless. This cap would apply to almost all modifiable statistics in the game. Any attempt to exceed these values would simply be a wasted perk or add-on slot. Now, dear viewer, you may have a few questions. Firstly, why cap these values? In the example you presented, stacking these perks isn't even that powerful. No one's running around abusing the Brutal Strength fire-up meta. And that's quite correct, dear viewer. So, what's the point of implementing a cap? Well, I'd argue there are a number of examples in this game's history in which stacking certain effects was impactful to an unhealthy extent. Let's start with an example on the killer's side. The release of the 6.1 patch saw many changes that impacted the meta significantly. The specific changes relevant to this discussion, however, were the increasing of gen timers to 90 seconds and the buff to the perk Thanatophobia. These changes made it possible for a generator to take 3 entire minutes to repair. By stacking the effects of Thanatophobia and Hex Pentimento, a killer, typically Legion or Plague, could reduce the survivor's repair speeds by up to 52%. If you never had to play one of these matches, count yourself lucky. It was hellish. I bring all of this up to point out that if we had a cap in place, this sort of thing could have been prevented. Setting a cap on the amount a killer can slow down generator repair speeds would prevent killers from creating such horrendously unfun scenarios. Another shining example, dear viewer, comes from more recent times. Up until its nerf in the 7.4 update, survivors were finding a variety of ways to stack the perk made for this with other haste-based perks and add-ons in order to create infinite builds, ones in which you were almost uncatchable. The most common example was the Hopen made for this combination. During the endgame, survivors with this combination were able to move at 110% if uninjured. This meant that during the endgame, survivors could make themselves nigh uncatchable. This led to some very frustrating experiences for killers, as there was no opportunity to make plays and their actions had, in essence, become pointless. If a cap had been in place, survivors would have been able to make use of haste without stacking the effects and creating these terrible endgame scenarios for killers. Overall, I think these examples clearly illustrate the potential benefit of having a modifier cap system in place. Preventing the excessive stacking of effects in both instances would have done a great deal for the game's health overall. The second point to make is that a system like this would enable behaviour to make balance changes and introduce new perks that apply currently available buffs without creating horrible new metas. Let's return to our pallet breaking example from the beginning briefly. At the moment, behaviour are limited in what new break speeds they can make available to players. Too much, and combining the effect with Brutal Strength may give players access to values that are too high. Let's imagine, dear viewer, that behaviour adds the imaginatively titled New Perk, and this new perk allows you to break pallets up to 30% quicker. Suddenly, combining Brutal Strength with New Perk would allow for 50% faster pallet breaks. As such, killers could render pallets almost mute, leading to some painful gameplay in which the primary means of survival is much less useful to survivors. With a buff cap in place, however, behaviour could introduce a new or reworked perk that offers a high break speed, knowing that the buff cap would prevent the stacking of perks beyond a set point. Now, dear viewer, I can already hear you saying, "You make this sound like a cool idea, Cameron, but wouldn't having up to 49 different stat caps make learning this game even more difficult? How on earth could anyone hope to learn all of these values and consider them when creating builds? We aren't all basement dwellers like you, and we have actual lives outside of this game." Very true, but consider another element that has been made easier for newer players to learn: status effects. Behaviour, very sensibly, realised that learning all of the different status effects was quite difficult for newer players. Their solution? Introducing little descriptions into the relevant perks and add-ons, making it much easier for players to understand what the different effects do. Simply, replicating this system for the buff cap would mean that even if a player doesn't know what the cap values are, they can read them in the relevant perk and add-on descriptions and apply it to their larger build. With this worked example, you can see that a player is given the relevant information that can then be applied to the rest of their build. A quick bit of maths gives them an idea of what perks should and shouldn't be stacked together if they seek to get maximum value from their perks. Overall, this system, while certainly daunting at first, could be made accessible by the simple addition of footnotes to the relevant perks and add-ons, thereby giving players all the information they need to make informed choices. At this point, I must admit the discussion of this concept is over. The rest of the video is, frankly, going to be boring to people who aren't me, or at least as lonely as me. I'm simply going to be presenting some tables that propose what caps I would place on different values, and give some reasons why. From this point forward, there is no more overall concept explanation, just statistics. If you wish to jump ship now, I wouldn't blame you. Thank you very much for watching this far. For those who are still with me, maybe go outside? Still with me? That's brave. For a number of these values, the cap is redundant and simply there for the sake of consistency. I probably won't be discussing most of these values, I just think it's better to have them and not need them, rather than need them and not have them. If you want to skip straight to the killer caps, these are available at the displayed time. For now, these are the timestamps for the various survivor caps. Starting off the survivor side, we have the caps for general movement. The sprinting bonus has been capped at 50%. At first this may seem odd. Survivors can't stack exhaustion perks, and that is correct, but they can stack the movement speed after losing a health state with a sprint. These situations, while rare, can be frustrating as the survivor is given massive distance and you have to spend twice as long W keying just to continue a chase. With the cap in place, the onus is now on survivors to use their exhaustion perks more safely in order to not be wasting them. A 7% haste cap is pretty obvious. At no point aside from sprint bursts should a survivor move as fast or faster than the killer. With this cap, haste bonuses can still be used effectively, but not stacked. An extra bit to note here is that I've listed these as separate stats. Essentially, under this system, whilst you won't be able to stack things like Hope and Made for This, or Lithe and an Injury Sprint Burst, you will be able to stack a Haste perk like Hope with an Exhaustion perk like Lithe. The Sprinting status and Haste status will be considered two separate status effects. The Vault Speed bonus has been capped at 10%. This value may seem insignificant at first, but for experienced survivors who know how to make use of powerful loops, this can be a game changer. Previously, Resilience could be combined with Spine Chill in order to provide a 15% bonus to vault speeds, and it was powerful enough for behaviour to remove the combo entirely. Sticking a cap here may lead to behaviour adding more perks that can affect the vault speed value. Crawl speed has been capped at a 50% increase. This is the current bonus provided by Tenacity, a value that may seem odd to cap, but I think there are situations in which this could get out of hand. For example, I think it'd be best to avoid survivors being able to crawl under pallets anytime they go down within the same postcode as one. Next is the caps for altruism. Healing is set to a 100% increase cap. Whilst I think it's pretty redundant to increase healing above 100%, there are certain situations in which it can be too good. Think we'll make it and we're gonna live forever. Recovery has been capped at 100%, the bonus provided by Boon Exponential. Whilst often recovery is used to punish slugging, an unhealthy playstyle, there are certain circumstances in which slugging is required due to false dichotomies being present. In these instances, we don't want to punish a killer for making sensible plays. Self-healing has been capped at a 50% bonus. This essentially means that survivors won't be able to heal themselves faster than 16 seconds, the default time it takes for another survivor to heal them. Unhooking speeds have been capped at 100% faster. Since the end transmission mid-chapter, killers are no longer able to grab at unhooks, thank God, so this may seem redundant, but it's an example of making a cap for the sake of consistency. The following caps are for objective-based play. First is probably one of the shining examples of why I think a system like this is necessary. Repair speeds. Behaviour are experimenting with perks that can increase repair speeds more and more recently. Whilst it's nice to see some new perks making their way into the meta, stacking all of them can lead to really frustrating matches as a killer. Setting the cap at 20% means that under the best circumstances, survivors can fully repair a generator in 75 seconds. Bear in mind, this is generator repair, different from a toolbox repair, so toolboxes wouldn't be capped under this system. A further note here is that a toolbox repair would be considered separate from a general repair. Essentially, while using a toolbox, you couldn't benefit from the bonuses of perks like Overzealous and Deja Vu. Exit gate opening has been capped at a 50% bonus. This means that under the best circumstances, gates can be opened in only 13 seconds. Though under normal circumstances a buff cap may seem unnecessary, consider that other strong endgame perks can leave killers in a poor position during the endgame. Having gates ready in less than half the normal time would leave the killer in an even worse state and lead to even more frustration. These caps limit certain values associated with items. First, opening chests cannot be done more than 100% faster. I don't think it's even possible to achieve this in the current game, but in case behaviour wishes to improve search speeds, this cap would prevent any insta-searches. Next, rummaging has been given the same cap. This ability is essentially the same as searching a chest, just with a different animation. Therefore, it stands to reason that the cap should probably be the same value. Finally, item consumption reduction, something only provided by Streetwise, has been capped at a 25% bonus. Some items, despite behaviour's best efforts, continue to be incredibly powerful, and making them last so much longer would simply make the whole experience more frustrating for killers. Setting a cap means that things like commodious toolboxes can't be given the lifespan of a tortoise. The next two caps are simply the two totem related caps. Cleansing has been capped at a 100% bonus. This would mean that, at best, survivors couldn't cleanse a totem in less than 8 seconds. Overall, whilst defending a totem would be made difficult, it would still be a slim possibility for some killers. Next, blessing has been capped at a 50% bonus, meaning that totems cannot be blessed in less than 12 seconds. The buffs provided by boon totems can be powerful, and killers that take the time to snuff them often waste precious time doing so. If boons could be set up too quickly, killers would just now have to accept that snuffing totems is a losing battle, and there's nothing they can do without simply throwing time away. The cap would ensure that survivors have to give at least a certain amount of time if they wish to make use of boons. I've designated this category as bullying because I'm probably a toxic entitled killer main or something. First, the wiggle speed has had a cap set to 25%. Whilst only one perk affects this at the moment, any other perk cannot currently be made with the same effect for fear of making survivors unhookable. Next, the struggle effect has been capped at 100%. Once again, there is only one perk that currently impacts this stat, and once again, the lack of cap means that behaviour cannot create any more perks in the same vein for fear of making survivors unhookable. Finally, sabotage speed has been capped at a 70% bonus. At the moment, sabotaging is difficult in most circumstances. However, if you stack all of the speed effects, sabotages can be performed very quickly with little risk to the survivor. By setting a cap, I intend to make sabotages consistently risky, even if a survivor min-maxes for sabotage speed. I've given the final survivor category the same moniker as that Minecraft chest we all have. Miscellaneous. First is the Grunts of Pain reduction. Only a few perks grant this bonus, and I've set the cap to a 75% reduction. This is so that an injured survivor is never silent, unless that effect is explicitly granted by the perk, think parental guidance or self-preservation. In instances where survivors are simply granted the reduction effect, they should be at least slightly audible to the killer. Being completely silent makes tracking difficult and removes a lot of the effectiveness of mind games. Next, I set a cap on increasing the skill check success zones, something only granted by this is not happening. Introducing a 30% cap would allow behaviour to create more perks that play around with skill checks, without creating some kind of dystopia in which hyper-focused greats are guaranteed to survivors. These are the timestamps for the various killer values. On the killer side, we're starting with the chase values. Haste has been capped at a 15% bonus. It's difficult to achieve a higher value than this in the current version of the game, however, behaviours seem to be creating more perks and add-ons that utilise this buff. Setting this cap then prevents killers from becoming completely unloopable for extended periods. Vaulting has been capped at 40%. Whilst I don't think that increasing the value above this is useful for more than meme builds, the ability to block windows using Bamboozle makes it somewhat scary against certain killers. Breaking has been capped at a 35% bonus. This means that a killer cannot break pallets or walls in a time faster than 1.5 seconds. Whilst this will certainly make chases far more oppressive, pallets are at least guaranteed to make some impact. Pallet stun reduction has been capped at a 50% reduction, the value provided by enduring. Whilst it's fine having a perk that reduces stuns, I think a survivor should at least be somewhat rewarded for a successful stun. Lunging has been set to a 100% bonus increase. At the moment, it's impossible for this value to be achieved, however, setting a cap means that behaviour would be able to play around with this idea without creating cross-map lunges. Inflicting Hindered is something typically only available to a few killers. However, with the introduction of Forced Hesitation, survivors can be hindered by any killer. Setting a cap on this stat means that a survivor can't ever be forced to just accept they have no ability to loop. The next is one of the more obvious reasons for implementing a cap like this. Successful basic attack recovery has been capped at a 40% reduction. Killers that take a health state should always incur some cooldown, and this cap would mean that a basic attack cooldown is never quicker than 1.6 seconds. The next caps are based around generators. First is the cap set for performing the damage action. The value has been capped at 40%. Whilst this may seem insignificant, killers that damage generators should always give the survivors nearby at least some distance. Next is the immediate regression that can be applied to a generator. I've set the cap at 40%. At the moment it's not possible to apply this value, but I made the cap for the sake of future-proofing. Further, the rate of regression that can be applied to a generator after it has been damaged has also been capped. During the gen kick meta, it was possible to impose a 400% regression on generators through the use of Call of Brine and Overcharge. In those matches it was miserable to be a survivor. Finally, I've placed a cap on the bonus regression that can be applied through missing a skill check. At the moment there are a few weaker perks that can apply this effect, but these perks can be very effective against less experienced survivors. By setting the cap to 10%, the maximum regression that can be imposed for missing a skill check is 20%. These caps are for anything related to hooking survivors. Picking up survivors has been capped at a 35% bonus. Currently, this value isn't attainable, but the cap would mean that killers would always be leaving themselves at least somewhat vulnerable when picking up a survivor. Mirroring this, survivors cannot be dropped more than 35% faster. This would mean that in those rare situations, survivors have at least some time to react. The time it takes to wiggle free has been capped at a 25% bonus, meaning that a survivor would be guaranteed to escape a killer's grasp after 20 seconds of struggling, unless, of course, Mad Grit is in play. Bonus hook progression has been capped at 20%. This is only granted by Monstrous Shrine at present, but the reason for a cap should be obvious. We don't want survivors to become unsavable. The next set of caps is mostly about the action speed penalties that can be applied. There are too many to discuss individually, and this video is already getting a bit long. I'll give reasons for ones that are perhaps not so obvious. Crawling has had a 50% penalty cap applied. Simply, slugging is often a painful playstyle to go against, and empowering it too much is potentially dangerous. The skill check success zone reduction has been capped at 60%. Any further reductions could allow for terrible builds designed entirely to stomp newer players. The next stat in its own category is the terror radius reduction. The cap has been set to a 12 meter reduction. Essentially, a 24 meter radius killer could have their radius halved, and a 32 meter killer could have theirs reduced to 20 meters. potentially powerful on the right killers, but still giving survivors some warning unless they explicitly have the undetectable status effect. The final category is for exit gate blocking. First, the exit gate switches cannot be blocked for more than a total of 60 seconds per match. This one should be pretty obvious. Survivors need to be able to progress the objective at some point. Further, the gateway itself cannot be blocked for more than 60 seconds. Again, survivors need the option to escape at some point. And that finally finishes it. That's an exhaustive list for all the proposed cap values I can possibly think of. For the 3 of you still watching, thank you. That's it for this one. I've now explained everything I possibly can about this system concept. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, send an email, make a forum post and send a link. Whatever your ideas are, I want to hear them. I don't make this video to declare my ideas as gospel or something, I just hope to maybe inspire some conversations. By discussing our ideas and putting them together, we can get that bit closer to making DBD the best version of itself. Thank you very much for watching, dear viewer, and I hope to see you in the next one.